Okay, everybody. You can come this way. You can bring your food here. There's still a few seats left, so just take them wherever you can find them. Okay, wonderful. It's great to see so many people here today. I lied about the topic, so we're not talking about finance or banks at all, but I thought it would be good to really up the audience numbers this month. No, that's not true. So we're very fortunate today. I've been trying to get this man to speak for us for about a year now, but ClearBank have been in a news blackout or PR blackout or whatever.
Let's go with both.
Okay. So his legal team told him that he couldn't, but today it's no holds barred. Just to give you a bit of a background, he's a very good friend of our company, Elasticloud. We met in 2011 when Andrew was making digital wallets for Essex coffee shops, no less. And,
that is a big market right there, I tell you.
Big market of 11, and. But Andrew's been lost my train of thought now. Andrew's been a very, very long-term user of Azure. He was one of the architects of actually bringing Azure into ClearBank because he'd had such a positive experience with a string of startups in finance on the run up to it. What we're hoping tonight is for some really sort of fast-paced, sassy slides on how to set up a bank in Azure. Right. Over to Andrew.
So I'm going to try and put a bit of a show on because I was told to do something a little bit different. So bear with me, guys. So the first thing I want to do is say, ask yourself this question. Are you ready for a fight? Are you ready for the biggest challenge of your working career? Because a couple of you, I can see already, are sitting here saying, if he can build a bank, I can build a bank, right? Now, believe me, building a bank is horrifically hard, horrendously hard. I have absolutely hated every moment of it, to be honest with you. So why do you feel like, or why should you listen to me on that? Well, not many of you will know this, but actually I'm one of the founding members of ClearBank. And back in 2015, Nick Ogden, who's our founder, he sat me down and he said, Andrew, I want to build a bank. I want you to build a bank with me. And we're going to go on that journey. A startup is unbelievably hard to make successful. But if you want to build a bank, it's up here. And I was listening to him and I thought, before I could get an answer out straight away, Nick then said to me, you know what? I don't want to build just a bank. There's only 4 clearing banks in the UK. I want to build the 5th. And nobody has done that in 250 years. 250 years. That is just such an immense amount of time. So many things have changed. So the opportunities for me really was to work with Nick and say, actually, let's be the first people in 250 years to build a clearing bank. But I was sitting there, like many of you are today, thinking, well, actually, this is the 21st century. Things have changed a little bit, right? Things have changed. So let's build that clearing bank in the cloud. Hopefully that sketch is there. Yeah, lovely. So let's build that in the cloud. Because you know what? I'm a bit egotistical sometimes. I didn't want to be just the CTO that built the first clearing bank in 250 years. I wanted to be the first CTO that actually built a clearing bank in the cloud. Now, that may sound daunting, but actually, if you've got a value proposition or somebody like Nick who's guiding your ship, so to speak, it's a real opportunity. For us, it gave us the chance to reimagine what a clearing bank could be. We could reimagine the products and services that we wanted to offer. And most importantly, I got the opportunity to reimagine how you would deliver those. How would you deliver those in the 21st century? Now, we have infrastructure as a service. We have platform as a service. We even have software as a service, right? All of these things that we're becoming familiar with, especially within Azure. So we had that opportunity. And what's the fruits of that conversation back in 2015? Well, ClearBank, despite what you may see in the press, offers one product, banking as a service. And we started talking about banking as a service. We started engineering banking as a service right back in 2015. Now, before I actually came here today, I decided to spend 5 minutes on Wikipedia, that well-known font of all knowledge, just to check that actually, was anybody else building banking as a service as early as us? And to my knowledge, all I can find is some references towards the end of 2016. So I think actually, I'm going to be a bit egotistical again here and say, maybe ClearBank's not just the first clearing bank in 250 years or the first clearing bank in the cloud. We're actually pioneering banking as a service. Now, most of you are looking a bit blank-faced and just saying, what on earth is banking as a service? And I'll try and make it, I'll try and articulate this in the best way as possible. Think of all the things that make up a bank, right? So deposits, lending, interest rates, some really boring stuff, some really fun stuff. But just think of all those things and bundle them together. What we wanted to do is actually decouple that, deconstruct it, deconstruct all those elements that make up a bank, and at a granular level, turn those into services and expose those services out to our customers. Now, ClearBank doesn't have customers as in you and I. We're not a retail bank. ClearBank is a clearing bank. That means our customer base are fintechs. Our customer base is credit unions. Our customer base is other challenger banks or building societies. Well, banking as a service, should I say, is about delivering services to those other institutions so that they can reimagine what banking of the future looks like, what our customer experiences look like in the future. Now, as a CTO, you get a couple of questions sometimes, like when to buy a product and put it together, when to partner with somebody, or actually the fun bit, and the bit that you guys are probably here for, is when to actually build. Now, banking as a service is something that you can't really just go out and say, I'm going to strategically partner with X, Y, and Z. I can't really go out there and say, I want to purchase 3 or 4 different products and bundle them together. We wanted to build for the cloud and in the cloud. And not many products, as you will all know, actually are built for the cloud straight away. A lot of it is lift and shift. And that means I've got to lift and shift that and bolt it together, try and deconstruct it, and then deliver it. So we took the opportunity, really, to say, you know what, we're going to build that. Now, this bit might be a bit embarrassing for me at this particular moment, but what I want to do is really stress the most important sector of people in building out banking as a service. You like this? Or maybe not. Developers, 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 developers. The most important aspect for building ClearBank is our developers. That really has hurt, right? Okay? The most important factor is actually building a development environment, a development team that actually gets it. That they work hard, they deconstruct, they deliver those services out there. And you know why? Because banking as a service is built by developers. We build those services. We build real-time APIs and we deliver those. And you guys as developers, you consume those. You consume them. You build your own proposition around them. You actually reimagine what banking in the future should look like. The customer experiences, the customer outcome, those customer journeys. We all talk about fintechs. We talk about what does banking look like in the next couple of years. Well, actually, it's built by you as developers. Now, we're going to try something here, right? So I actually went all in there. I think I should have got a round of applause for that, but we'll just skip that. But this is your opportunity to help me, right? Because what I want all of you to do, every single one of you, is channel your own Steve Ballmer. Yeah? So what I want all of you to do is let it out. Because actually, you are the most important people in making banking as a service successful. You're the most important people in actually delivering banking of the future. So I'm hoping all of you are going to do this. So I'm going to go back that slide, and I want all of you to enjoy it, right? Clap your hands when you're shouting out developers. Pump your fists. Go all in, right? Stand up on that chair. Even put an American accent on. Let's really go for it, right? And I know there is so many of you in here have been saying, I can't wait to do this. You know, it's been 5-6 years. I've seen this. I want to do it, right? So we're all going to do it together, and I really want to see some people get behind this. Ready? So I've got it lined up. Developers, 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 developers. Right. Give yourselves a round of applause there, guys. Thanks. I was so worried that would be that tumbleweed moment when I just do that completely on my own and look up. Well, anyway. But anyway, I'm trying to stress the point. Actually, Steve Ballmer was brilliant when he did that speech because it really does get across the importance of that point. Politicians may say it 3 times, but why say it 3 when you can say it 10, right? It really does drive it home. So what I want everybody to take home from today is, if it's only one thing, is that actually developers are the most important people in building banking, financial services of the future. Don't think it's banks, it's actually you guys building those experiences for the banks themselves. Now I'm going to calm down a bit now, as my hype moment. But essentially some of the things that we have to focus on as developers. Now I term these as fundamentals, right? As a CTO, I'm constantly trying to drum into our teams these fundamentals. Number 1, security. Pretty obvious for a bank why I'd say security, right? But actually, for every single one of you, when you start building any sort of experience, securing your data, securing your customers' data, that's got to be your number 1 priority in today's 21st century day and age. Number 2, availability. Now, we all know a couple of stories where banks struggle with availability in recent years, right? But for us, it's a big thing. We can't decide that actually it gets to 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, and as a bank, we're all going home, can't be bothered, we're down the pub. That's not going to happen, right? We can't have lengthy maintenance windows. We can't do that. We have to be up 24/7, 365 days of the year. So everything our developers do has to be focused around delivering that availability. From conception to design, to delivery, to actually the rollout of those services. How do we stay up 24/7? And number 3, fundamentally, performance. What's the experience that you guys expect right now when you make a transaction in your bank? Instant, right? And that should be instant no matter when you do it. If all of you make a transaction at exactly the same time, you still expect it to be brilliant, thank you. Very briefly, right? So that performance element we have to have in our mind. Right? ClearBank's proposition is very much about real-time APIs, real-time access to data. Everything we do has to be instant. We even bill our strategic partners and our customers in real time instantly. Yeah? That's what we want to get to. So these are the fundamentals that we try to instill across our innovation team. And I will say this, actually, building out an innovation team is quite hard work. So we started off with just 4 guys, and now we're some 110, 120 developers. I'm not going to do 110. Ooh. This is when the slides stop working. Right. So we've just talked a little bit about banking as a service and what ClearBank does. Right at the start there, though, I talked about the opportunity to reimagine what a clearing bank could do. But actually, for me, it's also about reimagining how a clearing bank operates. Now, cloud first for banking as a service, that makes sense, right? But how many businesses do we all know, whether they're institutionals, whether they're banks, whether they're just small businesses, that have a local area network? Right? No, get rid of it. Do it in the cloud. How many of us run Active Directory on-prem? Don't do it. Do it in the cloud. How many of us have shared network spaces? Don't do it. Do it in the cloud, right? There's a bit of a theme running here. Do it in the cloud, right? And we use Microsoft Azure pretty much for everything. We use Office 365 pretty much for everything. And I'll give you some real examples of the benefit of leveraging the cloud for everything that you do. We started off as a small company with just 4 people. How many office moves do you think we've had in the last 3 years?
15.
Well, I mean, that is a little bit excessive, 15. That's, I would say lower than 15, but higher than 6, right? So let's just stay with that. That's a hell of a lot of actual office moves. Now, some people may be saying, what are you doing? You're picking rubbish premises. But we're not, right? What it is just a natural state of a growing business. Now, how hard is it to move 15 times as an office, or 6 times, or whatever? How hard is it to do that if you've got all of those line of business applications and client services and everything else that sits there in a traditional fashion? Or is it so much easier to do what we did, which is I'll unplug that power cable, I'll walk down the road, or actually one floor, we moved the floor once, plug it back in, ta-da, I'm done. Everything is literally done over the cloud for us at ClearBank. We operate 3 sites now, and each one of them has nothing more really than a network connector, a router, some cabling, desktop PCs, that's it. Everything else runs virtually in the cloud, everything. So if you're thinking of building a bank, think about actually how you're going to operationalize your offices and everything else that comes with that. This is going well. Now, some of the things that I think a couple of you in the audience may be a bit more interested in, some of the challenges and considerations we had to have when building out a bank as opposed to just building out any other business in the cloud. Now, for us, we're a clearing bank. And if you don't know what that means, essentially it means we provide instant access. Well, not instant all the time. We provide instant, but the other clearers don't. I shouldn't say that, but anyway, edit that one, edit that. Right? So essentially, we provide access to the payment schemes of the Bank of England. Now, for us, we had some challenges. That number 1 challenge there, physical connections from the payment schemes themselves. So I had this lovely white sheet of bit of paper, and I'd drawn out this lovely cloud, and I put everything into that cloud. And then John, in his white van, turned up and said, I've got a cable, and I need to stick it somewhere. Guess what I said? I can tell you where to stick that, John, but I'm probably not going to get away with that, right? So we had to build out physical data centers. And what's made that worse is not just John with his damn cable, he's bringing along with him physical VPNs, physical HSMs, physical kit that I've actually got to plug in somewhere. And at some of the payment schemes, they even turned up with a server and said, you need to rack this and put it somewhere. Now, that is not exactly virtualization. That's not exactly cloud. I mean, in my mind, it's not very 21st century. But I had to deal with John and his damn cable. So we'll talk about how we actually solved that shortly. The right to inspect. Now, this is very bank-specific, actually. Now, this is quite a tough one. I think a lot of people forget that when you're building out services in the cloud, especially with a regulator, they actually reserve the right to inspect. The right to inspect your operational centers, right? The right to inspect your physical kit, the right to inspect your on-prem data centers, the right to inspect anywhere that you can think that your data has actually gone. So how do you solve that? Especially in a cloud environment, how do you do that? Well, we're quite lucky, right? Because Microsoft Azure has a contract amendment. And I'm going to make sure I get this right. I think it's called the FCA amendment. I'm looking at you, Richard. Is it the FCA amendment? Something like that, right? But let's go with that. There's no lawyers in here, so we'll just rebrand that as the Microsoft amendment. So it's the FCA amendment, and that allows us to actually make sure that the regulator is comfortable, and what's the word I want to use here? Maintains that right to inspect. Now, as a CTO at a bank, you have something called the senior managers regime, which means I'm accountable for making sure that that is actually true. So I may be able to go to other cloud providers and they'll say to me, yeah, we'll give you a contract amendment that gives you the right to inspect. But actually what I need the policies, this is my banking bit, the processes, and the procedures to back it up. I need to be comfortable that actually if the FCA come knocking on the door, that I've got the right paperwork, the policies, the processes, and the procedures to actually send those guys in and have a look at where our data sits. So they have the right to inspect our data and our services that we use within Azure. And bear with me, because I think my pen's dropped through my trousers and down to my shoes. And I'm not joking, actually, so we'll just have a moment here.
It's not wrong.
And here's one I pulled earlier, right? So, you know what? I thought this was going to go so slick. I practiced this at least twice. I don't know what's happened. Right, where is data at rest? I think this is actually good practice. Right? But the regulator will say to you, we need to know where your data is at rest. We need to know at all times. I need to know where your data is in flight. Actually, I think that's good practice for all of us to think of that. And it can get a little bit tricky. But in the cloud, you need to understand that at all times. So what we've had to do is work quite hard and actually being able to explicitly define the routes our data takes and where our data is at rest. Now, right back at the start of this, I said this is back in 2015. So back in 2016, when we made our application to become a bank, some of the challenges that I'm about to go through here have slightly changed because the world has changed. The cloud's evolved, and the regulators have evolved with that. So this is how we solved it. John, with his cable, I had to say, you can stick it into my private data center. And we had to have two of these. Now, why did I have two of them? Well, I needed to understand the resiliency aspect, that availability. I want to be up 24/7. So we have a number of the payment schemes across the bottom here going into two separate data centers. But I'm building for the cloud first. My mentality is cloud first, cloud first, cloud first. So what we did here is actually we leveraged Azure Stack, that's what it is, and we leveraged Service Fabric. We had a singular cluster, and we operate Service Fabric across both of those data centers. And that gives us an active capability. Now, on premises, we have no internet connections at all. John's cables are all private. He's actually dug the road up to plug this thing into our data center. But then we connect into Azure via Express Route. MPLS connections come out of our Service Fabric clusters straight up into Express Route, all privately connected and straight into the cloud. Essentially, the way that we solved these problems was to say, you know what, I can't change your mindset. I can't change the regulations around that. So let's embrace them. Let's create a single cloud for the cloud, in the cloud. Let's create our own cloud. So we essentially operate that as a hybrid cloud. Now, things have changed a little bit, and you saw me, obviously, in real time then, just rubbing out that Service Fabric cluster. Now, we've gradually decoupled that a little bit more. So instead of running that singular cluster on premises, we're starting to get rid of that. We're starting to have a lot more of our services that talk to the payment schemes now up in Azure. And in the next couple of months, actually, we won't have a single application or service that runs on premises. Even the ones that talk to those physical HSMs, the physical VPNs, the good old John turned up and installed. Now, the benefit and the beauty of Express Route is that I firmly believe it's an opportunity for us to actually kill on-premises data centers. Why do we have those things? It's essentially because I don't trust the internet connection. I need my MPLS connection. But Express Route allows me to jack that in there. So I'm hoping that in the next 18 months, actually, the regulators and the payment schemes will come with us even further on this journey, and we won't need on-premises at all. Rather, we'll be jacking MPLS connections straight into Express Route, straight into the cloud, and we'll be leveraging HSMs in the cloud. We'll be leveraging the cloud for everything. And that will actually make my life a hell of a lot easier, to be honest with you, because on-premises is hard, and I'm not a great fan, to be honest with you. Now, I've put this slide in here because often I get asked, actually, you've got, developers. How many developers have you got? And then I get asked, how do you actually engineer? What's your agile engineering culture? What is it? And actually, if you're interested in that, we have a couple of videos coming out in the next couple of weeks that will talk you through that journey a lot more. But today, I've just decided to stick one quick slide up here. Now, obviously, we embrace Agile. As I said, right at the start, we were very much Scrum focused. But Scrum, it's great, right? If you've got a small autonomous team. But as you grow, you need to understand, actually, what that looks like. So for me, one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years and part of this journey is that actually, Agile principles are far more important to me than actual practices. So what do I mean by that, right? If I take my teams, A, B, and C, Team A, immensely good at working within Scrum, immensely good. They're really effective. I can see them consistently delivery. Great. I can monitor their velocity. I can do all the things I want with Scrum perfectly with that team. Team B, not so successful. Team C, well, let's not talk about Team C. So what we've realized is actually that for each one of those teams, they have their own strengths and weaknesses. The individual personalities of the developers within them, individual personalities of their BAs, individual personalities of their Agile coaches. So what we said is, you can work Scrum in a pure fashion and a pure sense if that works for your team. If it doesn't, you can operate Kanban. If that doesn't work, you can have some sort of hybrid. It doesn't really matter. So our Agile engineering culture is based over 2 simple values. Number 1, I value principles over practices. Principles over practices. And number 2, I value delivery over everything else. Delivery over predictability. And that's quite tough in a bank because often we like to stand there and say, I expect this delivered here, 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 here. And we get a nice, funny looking waterfall kind of diagram. So you do end up with some challenges there. But I value delivery over that level of predictability. I'm not saying I don't want to try and predict things. I'm just saying I value actual delivery. So as I said, if you're interested in a little bit more about our Agile engineering culture, or you actually want to join our Agile engineering culture, because we may be hiring at the moment, then there's a couple of videos coming out on this in a little bit more depth. But I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it essentially gives you an idea of how we try and build things for banking as a service in the cloud. Now that leads me on to the actual building blocks. Cloud first. Standards focused. And we hear a lot about standards. And in the financial services, that's actually kind of a mixed message. So we standardize around something called ISO 20022. And I say it 20022 because the people in the know will say 20022. Other people who may have spoken for ClearBank in the past may have said 222 or whatever, but it's 20022. Now that standard is looking at a financial message. What does that look like? And it will look like this. It is massive. It's an XML-based message. Now what we've done is say, actually, I like the data dictionary. I like that. I like the concept behind standards. But I'm going to be compatible. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to be compatible with that standard because I'm going to lift the data dictionary and I'm going to create my own RESTful APIs that are JSON-based, not XML. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, actually, it's a scenario that you have with ClearBank. So if you want to initiate a payment, you don't use the full ISO 20022 payload. You don't do that. You use the scenario that's specific to ClearBank. And that means that our payloads are tiny. They're really tiny. They're very light. All of you developers in this room could consume a banking as a service endpoint and use it within an hour. Now, you're probably saying, why an hour? Well, that's actually because there's security protocols on top of that. We need to digitally sign the message, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, we can have people scaffold up and use banking as a service within hours. Because essentially, it's just REST. It's just JSON. And it's just the standard. We follow a service-oriented architecture. Everything we do in the cloud, services, services, services. But wherever possible, and as much as possible, we stick with microservices. Now, I say wherever possible because actually the world's not perfect. And I admit that, right? I can be a purist, and some of you in here will probably be very purist around how do I deliver microservices. But actually, it doesn't always work. And with payments, it can be quite cross-cutting. So it doesn't really quite fit. So what we do is we say, actually, wherever we can keep to the pure microservice architecture, let's do that. But let's just admit that actually sometimes that gets a bit tricky. If I value delivery over everything else, I may make a compromise here, there, and everywhere. And that's the same for our domain-driven development. So we follow DDD. That's exactly what we want to be doing within microservices. So we have the same challenges there. DDD, a great concept, but we can't always be perfect. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with not being perfect sometimes. As long as you deliver, if I keep delivering and I get to that endpoint, it doesn't matter if I've gone a little bit off course and zigzag to get there. It's actually the fact that I've delivered and I've moved forward and I've got there, that iterative approach. And that's really when you start thinking agile principles as opposed to just practices and delivery on its own. Event-based architecture, orchestration, all of that enables us to get to banking as a service. And why did I skip that? Because I have a cool little diagram. Essentially, we have everything is broken down into 2 patterns. Everything ClearBank does, or what we build ourselves, follows either our event pattern or our command pattern. So the event pattern, let's start with that. Everything that ClearBank does comes in through Microsoft Azure's API Manager. We love that, right? Everything that we do is built around APIs. APIs, 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 APIs. And that's very different for a bank to actually say that. And essentially, API Manager will route that on to the microservice that we need. And when you follow the event pattern, that microservice does its work and it raises out to the events. And we're very into Event Grid. Love Event Grid in Azure, love it. In the top here, Event Grid's being used to actually blast those events out, and then we have listeners, various listeners out there waiting for that action or that activity. At the top there, we then may actually use another technology such as Event Hub to actually buffer some of those events, because what we're going to do is stream those into our Databricks implementation of a data lake. And we might actually hive that off through analytical services that runs into a real-time monitoring capability, so we can see every single transaction that happens across banking as a service in real time. Now, if any of you have a banking background and understand treasury, that is immensely powerful to be able to see every single transaction, volume and value in real time. And we do that through this event pattern. At the same time, we've got listeners that are looking at audit. It's not mission critical. Audit's not mission critical. So we understand the tiering of our applications, and we do operate tiers. Audit, tier 3. If it goes down, it shouldn't be impacting anything else that ClearBank does. Let's just be honest with ourselves. We will catch that information up, replay those events, and next day we'll have all those audit events sitting there. I don't need those necessarily in real time. So therefore, it's not critical to how the application works or how banking as a service works. Same for billing. I think I mentioned a moment ago that we actually have billing in real time. This is how we do it, the event pattern. An activity happens across our banking as a service infrastructure. That could be just pinging an API. We may charge and bill 1,000th of a penny, 5,000th of a penny, a micro transaction. And we do that in real time to our strategic partners and to our customers. And we raise that up, bubble that into our billing entities, and then push that into our SQL pools. Now, we use elastic pools there. So we actually use a number of SQL paths, and we have elastic pool sets that understand that, because I don't want to run too many DTUs. It costs money. So everything that we do is understanding scale. Yeah? Let's not build bandwidth for everything. Let's actually elastically scale up and down, and we therefore leverage SQL pools. Now, at the bottom here, we have our command pattern. Now, in banking, this is pretty common, this one, because essentially what I'm saying is I've had an activity, and I command you, I'm pointing it right at you, just give me 5. Pointing you, to do a next activity, okay? And it must happen. And we use Azure Service Bus for that. Command pattern, everything goes through Azure Service Bus. Microservice, instructing another microservice, Azure Service Bus. And essentially, that is everything that we try to do when we build banking as a service. It's everything we try to do for delivering that banking experience of the 21st century. And you guys will probably look at this going, actually, this is quite simple. Right? It makes sense. And I've got a saying, right, which all of you would have heard, and it's the KISS saying. So I want all of you to shout back at me what KISS actually stands for. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, I will. Thanks. Yeah, cheers. Right. Okay. But that's what we try to do. Try and make everything simple. Simplicity, right, makes it a lot easier for us to build, maintain, and move forward. Now, I've just gone from something simple to something quite complex. Okay? And this is obviously my brain working right now. But artificial intelligence. We're talking about banking experiences for the future, and what does that actually mean? AI can be quite tricky, right? It can be quite tricky because essentially what you want is big data sets. And guess where clearing actually sits? We sit at the heart of everything that happens across financial institutions. So all the financial institutions that sit on top of banking as a service, all of our strategic partners, we sit at the heart of that. So that data set that's running through here is infinitely larger than what you would have if you build a bank independently of banking as a service. And there's certain ways that we're looking to use AI and deliver that through banking as a service. And I'll talk about a couple of those in a moment. But if you think about customer services, your AI chatbots, things like that, do you guys need to actually build that yourselves? Or if it's to do with financial transactions or with activities that are already prescribed, do you just want a consumer service and actually be able to bolt that into your proposition and say, bang, I've got it? Fintechs are amazingly agile because what they do is they take the best of breed and they integrate, and you end up with a fabulous customer experience, and they're built next to nothing sometimes. They're literally plugging and playing and moving this stuff around. And that's how actually banks of the future will probably look. Consume services, consume AI, consume this, build that, bundle it all together, and that's my proposition. So what other areas are we looking at for AI? Now, as a bank, DynaTrace for me is an unbelievable product. I have challenges at understanding what does normal look like across my infrastructure. And I need to understand what normal looks like so that I can detect any anomalies on my network. And my network's in the cloud. So how do I do that? So DynaTrace actually plugged in with agents into Azure. DynaTrace will then talk to actually all the network traffic that goes across our offices, our operational centers. And it brings it all into one place, and it runs AI over the top of that to baseline what normal activity looks like. The benefit of that? Well, when something abnormal happens, it knows it, and it flags it up. So our InfoSec team, I don't have 10,000 people sitting there in InfoSec. We have a very, very small, lean team. And why do we have a small, lean team? Because we use AI, actually, to go and understand our baseline, understand actually what is it being flagged up, and more than likely to be the real issues. So our InfoSec team can actually spend their time investigating potential issues rather than dealing with the number of false positives. And that's one of the biggest areas of AI, predicting what is actually happening, but actually removing all of that false positives, all the noise that we see with big data, and streamlining it down to just small data sets that humans can look at. Now, some of you may already know this product, DynaTrace. We use DynaTrace to understand how our microservices are talking to each other, how the events are being raised, to have a look at what's going on there. And again, it's the same proposition. We use AI to understand what's going wrong. Or please alert us, please tell us what's going wrong. And the most powerful thing about DynaTrace AI for us is that actually we start to predict issues. We can see when certain services are getting slower. Why is that taking longer? Before it's actually an impact on the experience that we're delivering. So we said actually we want everything to be instant. Everything should be highly available. Now I need to know actually if that's not going to be the case in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, an hour. I want early alerts. I want to be alerted that something might be happening. Because if something might be happening, I can scale up. I can ramp up. I can use the cloud. I can use elastic compute powers and scale up, deploy more services, and deal with that issue. Our guys can actually investigate that. So we are constantly looking at our uptime and understanding what we're doing. Early alerting with DynaTrace. Now, I'm not sure many of you would have read this because it depends how many of you are into financial crime. There's a little joke there that nobody got. Is anybody into financial crime? No? Carrying out fraud as a service. That's one of my specials, fraud as a service. Fraud detection as a service is what I should have led with, but okay, bit of a banking joke, wrong audience. So, feature space here. Financial crime. How do we actually look at fraud detection? How do we look at anti-money laundering? How do we make sure that actually looking and trying to protect your accounts or our end customers' accounts, our customers' accounts, protecting them from fraud doesn't actually end up with a poor experience? And I'll give you an example. How many of you have a gamble now and again? One. I like that guy in the back there. Like two, right? So occasionally, I'll have a gamble once a year. Put your hand up if you have a gamble once a year. Now, I'm not going to bet because there's a reason why I don't gamble that often, right? But essentially, many of us will only gamble once a year on a particular event. Yeah? Is it the Grand National, you guys? Yeah, the Grand National. So how many of you have actually found that when you bet on the Grand National, your card gets declined, or your bank sends a message to you saying, this looks like a fraudulent transaction? I know I do. Right? And it's because actually, in terms of our normal activity, that's abnormal. But what we do is actually, with Featurespace, we actually look at this and we use artificial intelligence to understand not what just normal looks like, but what normal looks like from our peer group. So with banking as a service, we run multi-tenancy implementations of Featurespace. We're starting to do this right now. So that means every single institution that works with us and uses our Featurespace tenancy, that means our AI is learning across all of those institutions and not just us. So let's take that example of the Grand National. Right? What is the outcome I'm trying to get to here? Well, when I make a gamble on the Grand National, AI flags that up and says, actually, potentially that's out of the normal. But you know what? There's lots of other normal indicators here. He's done it from his normal device. Okay? And actually, in context of everything else, all of us who have just put our hands up because we have a gamble then, in context of my peers, AI has learned that there is an event going on that we're all gambling with together. Because I've used my normal devices. The only thing that's abnormal about it is that I'm having a gamble. You've used all your normal devices. The only thing that you're doing is having a gamble. You've used all your normal devices. The only thing you're doing is having a gamble. Do you see where I'm going with this? Right? So all of it gets bundled together, and AI understands that and says, actually, that's not fraud. That would be a false positive. I'm going to let that go through. So my customer experience is seamless. It's uninterrupted. It's second to none. The benefit is actually, when you think of actually protecting myself or protecting my customers, it means all the fraud events that are being raised out of our Featurespace system, they're more than likely to be actually be fraud. So when we stop you, it's more likely to actually save you money. And that's what we want to get to. And again, it means actually the number of people that operate in our fin crime department, it's smaller, more lean, and they're more focused on the things that actually matter. Okay? So AI for us is something really important about keeping our operation centers lean, but also delivering that next step customer services and experiences. Now, a couple of you are probably thinking, you know what, he hasn't talked about anything to do with DevOps. Not yet, anyway. Okay. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about DevOps and things. Essentially, I want to be able to test everything through all the various environments. We have some 26 or 27 environments that we operate in the cloud. And I want to test in almost every single one of them. And that's not just my code. That's my infrastructure. And the only way I can do that is if my infrastructure is actually code. Now, we're not perfect, right? We're not perfect. We're not fully there yet. And obviously, when we built some of our services out in 2016 and we did that on-prem, we have challenges. We have human errors, just like everybody else has, right? We didn't do that perfectly. But we're getting there. And that zigzag journey, right? We've had a couple of zigs, couple of zags, but we're about to actually get to nirvana and the promised land. So what we want and what we do is actually we give DevOps capabilities to every single Agile team that we operate. We have a small core people of DevOps, right? They evangelize, I love that word, evangelize right across everything that we do. So that when we have a team, they say, actually, I want to build this out and test it. Not only do they build out their software, their components, they build the infrastructure underneath that it runs on. We take a vertical slice, therefore, and that application, let's take billing, right? That application for billing sits on its own tier, sits on its own node type within Service Fabric. Sits on its own infrastructure. I can control it, I can scale it up, I can scale it down, and you know what? If it goes all Pete-tong, it doesn't impact everything else. But the best thing is, I can actually test it in the dev environment, I can test it in my link environment, my integration environment, I can test it in my blue or my gold environment, I can test it in production. And it's repeatable. It's infrastructure, it's code, and it's repeatable, and it moves with us. Okay? And some of the technologies we use, you guys will probably know this, right? HashiCorp, Packer. We use that for creating some of our custom images. We don't have many custom images because actually I'm a very big believer in PaaS. I love platform as a service. And the reason I love that is because actually I'm a lazy CTO when it comes to certain things. I will be honest, right? I want people to manage things. I want people who know what they're doing to manage those things. And nobody's going to manage that slightly better than maybe Microsoft. As long as I'm confident, as long as I've got the accountability of that, let's use the right people to manage that infrastructure. So platform as a service for me is actually where the future lies with cloud. I may be wrong, but that's my own personal view. So I love that. So we don't have too many custom images. And we use Terraform because actually we want to abstract out that infrastructure, and so I can have that complete immutable environment. You know, it's repeatable again and again and again and again and again. And that feeds back into our whole ethos of the way that we started. I might do the developers again, but I don't think it'll work with DevOps. And you guys don't seem to be quite into it. This is good stuff to guys who really love DevOps, I tell you. So, obviously our artist decided to cut my head off. Did anybody watch Heroes with Sylar? Does anyone remember that? He's got a bit carried away there, I think, right? So a lot of people ask me, say, Andrew, actually, would you build a bank again? Would you do this journey again? Well, actually, so I had a lot of hair at the start of this, right? I had a lot of hair. It's thick. You know, I looked like, well, anyway, it was good. The stress and everything else that the challenges have caused, I may have lost a few bits of hair and aged a little bit over the journey. Right? So actually, no, I wouldn't. You know what? I wouldn't be interested in building a clearing bank ever again. I also think there's no value proposition in it anymore, in building it again, because we've already done it, right? You only get to do it once be the first people to do it in the 250 years. You only get to do it once to be the first people ever to do it in the cloud. So I'm not going to do it again. There's just no kudos there. But if you used to ask me, would you build a bank for the future? You know, the bank of the future. And please be the graphic. Yes. Hopefully everybody knows this, right? So obviously my flying DeLorean, would I actually build something for the future? And the short answer is, yes, I would. Because actually I think financial services and banking is about to go through quite an exciting revolution. And that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, I'm going to say it's because we've built ClearBank. Obviously, I'm going to say that, right? But we've built banking as a service. And what that allows you to do, or me to do if I was actually in your shoes and thinking, if I want to reimagine what a bank of the future should look like, it actually takes away a lot of my challenges. So the first thing is I can think about my value proposition. What am I actually trying to bring to the marketplace? People kind of forget that sometimes we build technology for technology's sake. We do that quite a lot, right? But actually, if there's something like banking as a service already there, I can consume it and I can think about my value proposition. The second point will be a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. So we've been talking about a bank. You don't have to be a bank. Does anybody know why I say that, what I mean by that? No? Okay. Pardon? You could be a hedge fund. You watch Billions. I love that program. Right? Yeah, I could be a VC. Anyway. No. So actually what I'm talking about is there's different elements of regulation. Okay, many fintechs are regulated, and they're regulated in a different way to us as a clearing bank. And we're regulated slightly different to a building society, and a building society is slightly different to a credit union, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. You don't have to be regulated all the way to being a bank. So right at the start, I said building a bank was up here, but actually, with banking as a service and some of the things that we offer, I don't need to do that. I can build down here. I can build down here because all of that hard stuff is done by ClearBank. If you want to look like, if you want to act like, if you want to feel like, you want to operate like a bank, you don't have to be a bank anymore. You can leverage banking as a service for that. You can even leverage elements of open banking. So why would you do that? Why would you raise the additional capital that you have to put away? So the challenges we talked about banking today, none of it has actually gone into the amount of money you have to raise just to park it somewhere. Okay? There is challenges with the capital, liquidity, and everything else that comes with that, and all the things I can make myself sound like a proper banker, said correctly, all the things I can do that. But essentially, you don't need to do that. And there's elements of banking as a service that takes all of that headache away from you. So actually, yeah, I would actually build another type of bank, but it wouldn't be a bank. And I'd build it on Azure for certain. So if we just go back to this diagram quickly, banking as a service. Think of my use cases, how I want to use it, how I want to bolt those Lego bricks of services together and deliver something new. Think about my value proposition. Select the services and capabilities, bundle it together, and then I will build the experience around it. When we went back to that developers, it was about you guys. How do you actually build around banking as a service? You're the people who are going to reimagine financial services for the future, reimagine what banks look like in the future. And our job here with ClearBank is actually just to treat banking as like a utility. We're here to support you, here to push you forward, here to deliver you no restrictions into what you actually want to deliver as your customer outcomes. This is a bit of a repeat, ready? Focus on your value proposition, focus on your product, focus on your customer experience. Spend your dev dollars, if you like, on building something new. Stand on the shoulders of the other people around you, integrate, build things for the future, and you'll get a value proposition far, far quicker. You'll get to market far, far quicker, and you'll build an experience that is far, far richer by actually thinking like that. Now, for those of you who are sitting here now stroking your stubble or your beard or your bald head, if you're like me, you might be thinking, actually, well, how do I do that? Right? How do I leverage banking as a service? This can't be just simple as I just get online and say clearbank.consume or anything silly like that. No, get yourself regulated. Think about the regulation that you want. And then come and talk to us. Actually, come and talk to us even whilst you're on that journey of trying to understand what you need to be regulated. You can get onboarded within days, within weeks at ClearBank. And we have a simulation environment. I love nothing more when I was a developer than somebody saying to me, this is how you integrate with us. There's your documents. There you go, son. Enjoy that. And actually, when we integrated with faster payments, backs, and chats, I got given some 9,000 pages to read, of which somebody said, shall we print those off? But no. But essentially 9,000 pages to read. And I boiled that down to just 18 that I thought were useful. As developers, all we want to do, I want an SDK. I want some open source. I want some Swagger docs, right? I get it. I used to be a developer. I still am a developer, sort of. This is debatable. Some people are laughing at me. But essentially, I get it, right? I want to actually just consume stuff. I want to plug and play. I want to use Postman. I want to use these tools to actually just use these damn services and see how they work. Understand it and build my proposition around it. Please do not spend time giving me this lovely document that tells me how to do that. So we don't. The best you get from us is a developer portal, a bit of Swagger information, some support, and essentially away you go. Get in that sandbox, get in the simulated environment, consume it, use it, and start building around it. That's how quick and easy it should be. I'm just going to focus just on two things else up on that slide. Everything real time, we've already touched on, but Open Banking API, version 3.1. Very specific, that one, 3.1. Does anyone know why I'm calling that one out specifically? Anybody got an open bank in mind at all?
Is it the latest one?
No, it's not actually. It's not far off. So it's the latest one that will be utilized, yes. Actually, there's version 4 already out. Essentially, version 3.1 gets us in line with our friends in Europe with the PSD2 compliance. Now, I'm hoping the next slide is the right one. I can't remember. Yes, excellent. So PSD2 compliance, that can be quite tricky, actually. So there's more regulations coming in. There's more and more and more of these regs coming in. So even if you're a fintech, even if you're a building society, credit union, whatever you are, you have to understand your regulations. And PSD2 has this concept of, I'm going to call it open banking because that's kind of what it is, really. Open APIs. You need to be allowed to have a third party talk to your core banking system. Me as a consumer, I need to be able to have the flexibility to go to a third party delivered maybe by yourself to make a payment out of my own bank account. I might not want to use my own bank account mobile app as the experience that I consume. Now that is unbelievably tough for so many banks to actually deliver. I'm sure all of you, if any of you have actually worked within one of the big banks, you'll understand why. And there's so many complexities. We all think about this and go, oh, it's quite easy. I'm just initiating a transaction. You can't just initiate a transaction. You just can't do that, right? Because I could be spending money on my card, spending on my mobile banking, spending on online banking, and then some third-party wandering app has come in and actually made a transaction all at the same time. Where did I check my balance? Just basic stuff, right? It's not that simple. But with open banking, we're all in on this, right? Because actually, I believe open banking delivers us a richer experience in the future. But actually, it opens up things like the underbanked. How do they gain access to banking and financial services? How do you understand how I spend my money? Some of us aren't great with it. I'm not great with it. I really can be quite dodgy with it. My wife is constantly telling me, Smith, will you stop going to Eat and Pod and all these places? You're wasting money. But with open banking, I can sit there and categorize those transactions and see what I'm spending, but not just on the bank account that I'm using, across all of the bank accounts that I may have. These are sort of propositions that we wander into. We seem to see propositions around debt management, understanding that, so the underbanked can start to understand what they're spending their money on and control their money in a far better way. So open banking is something that we are all in and really embracing. And in two big reasons, two big areas actually. The first one is, if you are a bank, if you are a building society, if you are a fintech, if you're a prepaid card, whatever you are, if you surface your accounts within banking as a service, out of the box, you'll be PSD2 compliant. Because ClearBank will do that for you as part of banking as a service. Yeah? We will provide the open banking implementation for your proposition. Simple as that. So if you're going to thinking about building a bank or building an experience or a fintech, we will do that work for you. And the final part, probably the part to end on really, is actually all those experiences I just talked about. How do you consume information from other banks? How do I go to HSBC? How do I go to Barclays? How do I go to Lloyds? How do I go to RBS? How do I go to X, Y, and Z and consume all that data? Well, guess what? Banking as a service will deliver you that capability as well. Consume our open banking API, and we, at Banking as a Service, at ClearBank, go off and do that for you. So guess what you're building? You're not building integration work. You're not building plumbing. You're spending your dev dollars on building a customer experience for the future. So I think I'm going to end it on that particular point. There's a couple of thank yous I should really do just at the end. So anybody who's seen my earlier decks and presentations will know that that's not really me. This is pretty good for me. So I'd like to say thank you to a small company called PPP. They helped me put this slide deck together. And you can connect with Lauren, actually. And if you want to stand up and talk to many people, she'll help you do that. Or if you actually want to learn to talk to investors, she'll also help you do that. I want to say thank you to a couple of the teams back at ClearBank who put together some of the imagery here and for actually allowed me to talk for the first time in quite some time. And you guys, feel free to connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And that'll be me. That's it. Mic drop. Oh, question, sorry. Apparently there's a Q&A. Nothing too technical. I'm a CTO, right? Not an architect. Let's just remember that. Oh.
Hiya. So you value delivery over everything and you want to let your developers loose. How did you do that? Well, developers can do crazy things sometimes when you just give them a cloud account. How much security was enough security? How did you release your developers but give them some sort of guardrails or safety nets so they can't do anything dangerous?
So that's a great question, actually. What's funny is I got asked that by a CEO. I got that asked by board risk. I got that asked by board. I get asked that by everybody. Now, essentially, I think the biggest thing to realize there is actually understanding that you need to trust people. There is an element of trust, okay? And it's not so much I want to centrally control things. Good leadership is actually about getting alignment. So what we try to do, we spend a lot of time talking, we spend a lot of time trying to evangelize with our teams and say, actually, these are the considerations that you must have. And there will be something like DynaTrace in the background there checking what you're actually doing. So if you go and spin up some resources in Azure, actually, we know that you've just spun that up. We want to know what you're doing with it, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, we give autonomy to the teams because we actually spend a lot of time in investing alignment. Now, the way that we do that a little bit is actually we operate two things. Something called a charter And it's not a chapter. If some of you are familiar with the Spotify model, it's not a chapter, right? A charter. So we have policies, procedures, and people with real bite who actually make sure that you do work in that particular way. So we call that a charter. And the second part we have is a guild. Charters are very formal about controlling, not people, but controlling outcomes, let's say. And a guild is a lot more about knowledge sharing. Okay, so we spend some time with like guild breakfast, guild lunch. We have guilds for security. We have guilds for architecture, guilds for APIs. Now, it's the security guild and the DevOps guild. Now, they're the only two guilds that we enforce one member from every Agile team to be actually a member of. So they have to turn up to that. If they don't, that's not me hitting someone, by the way. It has been known, right? But we're not going to, let's just gloss that over. But essentially, they have to turn up for that. And it's actually their role and responsibility to go and evangelize that to the rest of their team. And as I said, we're quite hot in actually monitoring what happens. But it's all about alignment. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Hi. This might be a little sort of down in the weeds, but just interested to know about it. If I understand right, you've done a kind of sawn-off subset of ISO 20022. Aren't you going to have to kind of do a more full implementation as part of the open banking requirement eventually?
So let's just start off with your comment about sawn-off. Okay, so we spent a lot of time with the guys who actually own that ISO standard. Not own it, they are the caretakers of that standard. We spent a lot of time in saying, actually, XML is not great. And they actually get that. So they're turning around and saying, no, we want people to be using APIs. So we agreed with them, and it's actually part of the thing that ISO is pushing, is to actually say, actually, compatibility and scenario-based APIs is where we want to go as a standard. So I think we're not doing anything that's bastardizing it or a subset. We're actually working to what will be coming out into the marketplace a little bit later. So essentially, we've worked with ISO to make sure we do that. Now, your point regarding open banking is quite interesting, because open banking will say that they are a standard. And I think anybody who's worked with a real standards-based implementation will turn around and say, you are not a standard. Okay? Open banking is not a standard. Open banking is a principle that has actually designed some lovely endpoints that we all kind of have as a standard way of doing things. Just like ISO, actually, open banking is a little bit fuzzy in some of its ways of which you can implement it. So the payloads within open banking, they're not necessarily aligned with ISO 20022. I think they'll gradually get more there. And when you look at people like, this is going to be a bit technical in the weeds, if you look at somebody like the Berlin Group and what they're doing across Europe with the PSD2, you've still got different flavors there. And you've got different flavors of how ISO 20022 is used right the way across Europe. So we're aware that actually we'll have challenges around that, but our whole stack, our whole data dictionary, how we define an account in banking as a service was based around that ISO 20022 data dictionary. So we think we're in a really, really good place, especially when you start looking at Pay UK and the new payment systems.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
You're a gambler, right?
Yeah, I think the sole gambler in the room.
No, there was 4 or 5 of us.
Okay, we've got a table, lads. So, yeah, where I was going with this is that there is, in the media at the moment, there's everyone's talking about the B word, financial regulation, what's going to happen, and all this sort of thing. So I'm wondering if you could comment on the blockchain, please.
Oh, you went with blockchain? Man, I was looking at my watch thinking we've got 10 days, something like that. So blockchain, you completely throw. I had an answer right up there for Brexit. But blockchain, okay, right. So blockchain's quite interesting for me. And I get asked a lot about blockchain. What are you going to do with transactions? What does that actually look like? Now, I have some reservations around how blockchain would be used with distributed ledgers for transactions themselves. Okay? I think I'm a realist sometimes. So just when we were talking about microservices and say I love the purism of it, but it's not always practical. I love the purism of blockchain, but it ain't practical. It's not going to happen probably in a very, very long time. And there's a couple of reasons why. Right? Centralization at the Bank of England, that's one thing. Right? Understand how I do quantitative easing. Understanding how I actually have inflation. All these things. Right? These are levers that we pull within the banking industry or economics and macroeconomics, which actually, if you start looking at blockchain or something like Bitcoin, if you're going to use that currency, they disappear. And I know somebody will say that's the whole point, but if you think about all the people employed within financial services, all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of how we were operating in that way, that's a big, big change. And big, big changes like that will take a long, long time. Do I see blockchain working in smaller, isolated, closed loop environments? Yes. I can see that working quite well. So if we were to say, that, let's have the UK Azure meeting group and we'll all operate on blockchain and actually transact amongst a lot of us, yeah, I can see that working. And I'm not overly worried about the scalability and performance of it because it's such a small network of people. When I get to a larger scale, I get worried. We have transactions per second throughput that we need to think about. With blockchain, I mean, I know that sometimes with Bitcoin, it can take me 5 minutes to actually execute the whole message. Execute and compute that across blockchains that actually have it clear and settled. So that's actually, there's some challenges with that. Do I think blockchain can be used in other areas other than financial transactions, in the financial services? Yes, I do, right? And I think there's some unbelievably powerful things with blockchain that I've seen started to happen with certain fintechs around identity, for example. Store my digital identity in a distributed ledger. I get that. With GDPR, challenges around that, I get that. If I don't own any data or I'm not the process of it, you as an individual, you own your data and you're controlling that on a blockchain, I'm completely behind that. And I understand the value proposition behind that. And I think actually that could be something that will happen in the next couple of years. And I know a couple of fintechs are already looking at this sort of stuff to say blockchain for identity, not for transactions. And Brexit, that's a completely different thing, right?
Hi. What about all the back-end analytics, the risk capital calculations, the treasury functions and all that of a bank?
Love it. That's a very banking question. So if you remember back to our event pattern, do you remember that diagram with event pattern and command prime? Everything that we do runs out into a treasury function. So part of that event pattern is actually raising all those events straight back out into our treasury function. So we have a traditional treasurer, a traditional treasury department, but we don't operate quite the same as every other bank because one of our guarantees is actually if you plant money with ClearBank, we don't lend it out. It's actually sitting 100% in liquid form at the Bank of England. So if you're using banking as a service, as a customer of ours, actually you will always be able to get your money out instantly, because we've kept it at the Bank of England. So our treasury function is not quite the same. In terms of all the data and the analytics and everything we need to compute, so our leverage ratio, our NIM, all of this sort of stuff, we do that in real time. We do all of that in real time. And I say, let me be honest, near real time. Okay, near real time. So the events get raised, it goes off into our treasury, we resurface and project some of the information into that, and our treasurer can see it in real time. But it's a different proposition, right? A very different proposition. I'm not in finance, by the way.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for a spectacular presentation. And I have a question. So I can see that you did quite a big journey in evolving your services, offerings, and so on. Can you maybe give us a few words how you've been selecting those ideas, maybe changes in your services or like replacement of the services or when your services arrived in Azure to actually bring them into production? Was it just community-driven development or there was some sort of like authority that was vetting them, checking them, and then bringing them into like production state?
Yep, okay, good question. So let's start with inception, right? So there's a bunch of stuff that we started with. So we are a bank, so we know regulatory-wise what we need to actually deliver. We understand what that bank is. So when we deconstructed that, we started saying these are the services that we must have. So if we want to look like, feel like, act like a bank, we already knew what they were, right? How we actually delivered those was actually we surfaced all of that through the various environments, and then we placed that out into a simulation environment, got customer feedback. So customer feedback loop, we have two actually. We have something called the voice of the customer, where the current customer base and strategic partners, they can have a look at what we're doing, and they can consume that within the simulated environment. And some of them will just say, this is how it works, and some of them will actually give us feedback. It's quite interesting, because we started with a blank sheet of paper, there is a massive, massive build that you have to do before you get to a tipping point where I can go out and say to you as a customer, what would you like me to build? because essentially we need to build these things. There's a regulatory bar, right? There's an operational bar. There's all these bars that we keep having to get over before we get to the point where I actually can turn around and say, you can consume banking as a service, and what else would you like on there? And one of the reasons why there's been that blackout really from ClearBank is we've been on this build journey to get to a point where we say banking as a service is rich enough for you to start to consume and use it. Now we're actually at a point where I'm coming out to talk to people and say, I'm going to operate something called customer futures. So potential customers that we already have that are saying to me, actually, these are the sort of experiences we want to build in the future. And I can see the value in it. And I think other people on your platform will see the value of it, but I don't want to build it. And then we go through a roadmap. And then we actually look at that and say, I see value in that, I see value in that, and I see value in that. And my role at ClearBank is kind of a bit unique with that one because I'm the custodian of banking as a service. So what I find now is that people will talk to me about the technology, and then they'll start talking to me about product. And they'll say, when are you bringing online sanction screening as a service? When are you bringing that on? When are you bringing this on? When are you bringing that on? So I know in a lot of conversations now about, actually, these are the services that we're starting to bring on. These are our capabilities in H1 this year. These are our capabilities in H2. How do you want to consume those? How do you want to leverage those? But customer feedback is actually the key for us. That is really the key. And the more customers that we get coming on board, the happier we are for, one, we're doing more business, but two, it proves our model, and three, it actually gives us a greater number of data points for feedback. Hopefully that answered everything.
Hi, great talk. Thanks a lot. Really helpful. So I guess it's a question about, you said you have 120 developers currently in ClearBank, and
Just under, yeah.
I'm wondering, one, how you keep them happy, and how you allowed. Well, in the sense that developers like to contribute to open source softwares and build stuff for themselves to like better their skills essentially. Like, how do you keep them happy in that sense?
Yeah, cool. So have you heard of a video or seen a video called The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us? Has anybody seen that? Yeah? It's a great video, actually. And I'd seen it about 5-6 years ago and then forgot about it until one of our developers said, Smith, you're doing a shit job at motivating me. That's exactly what he said. You're doing a shit job at motivating me. So I thought, hands up, I'll go back and watch that. Now, it's a challenge, right? With any startup, is that you start off really agile, really nimble, and it's quite exciting, right? And you're doing all these things, and you're racing. And then, especially if you're building a bank, you get a little bit more staid, and you get more people joining the bank, and you grow, and people bring with them their own ideas, they bring with them their own experiences, and let's say not all of them are quite in alignment with what you originally started up with. So you have to revisit that. In the last 6-7 months, we've worked quite hard on 3 main things. The first thing is autonomy back to the actual teams. You can really slip into a way of trying to control teams centrally. Now, you guys are engineers, right? And I can safely bet, if I was to tell you, this is actually how you should build something. So if I had a river, and I said, you know what, we need to get to the other side. And then I said to you, what I want you to do is build a bridge. And I'm going to tell you how to build that bridge. And I'm going to provide you with the actual bricks and mortar. And you go and build that bridge. You're going to turn around and say, this is a shit job, right? This is boring. And to be fair, sometimes in banking, it is boring. But if I do that, that's actually missing the point, right? 1, I haven't motivated you. 2, you're not really enjoying what you do. And 3, you'll probably get the same old solutions. So we want to spend a lot more time on autonomous thinking, really. And to say, actually, if I tell you to not cross the water, because you might build a tunnel, get to the other side, right? We'll find that actually our engineers, you'll come back to me and have a different idea that I wouldn't have thought of, or our architects wouldn't have thought of, or our principal of engineers wouldn't have thought of. So we really like that, right? So autonomy is the first one. The second one is that we introduced something called Innovation Friday. And what the dev guys decided to call it was Freaky Friday. Interesting. Occasionally. So basically what I said was, actually, it's for Thursday and Friday. Every time we get to a Thursday and Friday, once a month or once every other month, you guys build whatever you want. Down tools on banking as a service, down tools on ClearBank, where you knock yourself out and build whatever you want. And it's cool, right? It's unbelievably cool. What really interested me, is that I thought someone was going to build something that is completely out there, maybe even illegal. Who knows, right? You guys build some weird shit. Let's just face it, dev guys build some weird stuff. But I was worried about that. But what I've really found is that actually If people are starting to get motivated a little bit more and they get that freedom, guess what they built? They built stuff that actually was so bloody good, it's now on our roadmap. We have a load of monitoring tools. We've got a ton of stuff with AI. The reason why I said we're all in on AI is actually out the back of 2 or 3 Innovation Fridays where people have built unbelievable solutions with a bit of AI. So we said, actually, you go and build whatever you want, and if it's good enough, we'll get it in the backlog. And we do it quite socially, right? So we'll have a social gathering, everyone stands up, and we'll do a presentation, and it's a bit of a laugh and a joke, and it is good fun. So we find that that helps. And the third thing is, actually, we've just started to say, you know what, open source is something that allows me to master what I'm doing. Now, some of you guys probably go and contribute to open source. Now, I'm a bit old school, right? My teacher when I was a developer was very old school. A guy called Ted Smith, he used to stand there and wobble around and say, why the fuck are you doing that? Why would you do that? And then ran the head, right? And that's fine. And what he was actually thinking, and what he was talking about is, why the fuck are you working from home? It's a weekend. Go and get pissed. Go and sleep with women. Go and do that. Cut that from the video. Fuck me. You know when you just say something, you think, my wife's going to see that? No. So let's edit this. Ready? Go and get pissed on the weekend, right? Go and have fun with your friends. Go and drive. Whatever. Go and drive with pissed. Jesus, start again, right? Go and get pissed on the weekend. Go and have fun, right? He used to say that to me. And yeah, so I don't understand why you nutters decide to go home and spend all your time actually on open source. But I kind of get it, because it gives you the opportunity to master what you're doing. And I will say one thing, right? Developers are pretty egotistical. I even said that right at the start. I'm a little bit egotistical because I wanted to be the best developer, right? I want to be the first person out of university who got promoted. I want to be this. I want to be that. I want to be better than the next guy. And what you realize is that that might be true for a period. And actually, as CTOs goes, I'm shit up. Right? I am, right? Because I actually was a developer. Most of the CTOs I know, they're not, right? They have not come from any background. I can show them the back end of a cable. They're like, I don't even know what that is. That's an Ethernet cable. You know, they don't know what that is. Might have to cut this as well. But essentially, you know, it's about motivating people and that mastery. So we've actually started to say you can go and contribute to open source. We've started to consume a lot more open source stuff. And you'll start to see actually on GitHub that we're going to start pushing some of our DevOps kind of tools, some of the tooling that we've done around Service Fabric, some of the queue management stuff that we've started contributing back to that code base. And you'll start to see that coming out a lot more. But it's, for me, that's about motivate and mastery. And the key there is actually, right back when I said we value delivery over predictability, you guys as engineers, when you feel like you're delivering something, you make less mistakes. Our quality assurance looks pretty good because actually you've taken more time, you've delivered it, and you see it go through into production. I think that means that you guys are starting to master what you're doing a lot more. We have even little side bets in the office that, okay, I can get my code all the way through without a singular test failing. I've put 500 quid up on the wall and said, right, the first person to do that, bang, that's yours. No one's done it yet. And what's really interesting is people have forgotten that, so I've taken that 500 quid down. And when they watch this, they'll probably put that back up. But essentially, you know, it's just giving people the space to actually master what they're doing. So they're the 3 key things for us. Do you want me to repeat those? Because I've forgotten. No. Anything else, guys? Because I'm conscious of time and some of us have wives.
So I think you've got away with saying the word AI too many times, and nobody's asked you a question about it. So where do you see the future of data science and machine learning? We're not going to call it AI now. For ClearBank. So you've spoken a lot about what ClearBank has done, and the examples that you gave around data science were understanding issues with code and kind of financial obligations and regulatory obligations. So do you see data science as having a value add to banking as a service outside of understanding code issues or the regulations? Do you see it as being something that you can push to customers, or is this just to understand your obligations?
No, so we want to push stuff to our customer base, our strategic partners. And I don't want to speak too much about this because some of it's a little bit hush-hush, but essentially, yes. Right, I see that there's a lot of value with banking as a service delivering a bunch of services that you guys wouldn't have to build. And when I look at AI, I'll give you an example that we probably won't build. But when I look at AI, actually, there's an opportunity there to understand the larger data set. For me, AI is about predictability. Right? It's predictable machines, or machines that predict, and they predict better than humans. mortgage lending. Let's think about mortgage lending. If I have enough data on you, I can use AI to understand how much of a loan you could pay back. Yep. And actually what I can do is preempt that. I can shift through my thousands or millions of customers and actually come up with my top 100 hit list, if you like, for people who will take a mortgage off of me and they're actually going to repay it back. I can even start to see probably what their mortgage payments are already. So I can start calculating that a little bit more accurate. If you use AI in that particular sense, you can see how AI is predicting actually a value chain for me. I've probably only got to hit 100, 200, or 1,000 customers correctly, and I've made a bank at that particular point millions of pounds. So AI around that is actually unbelievable at predicting outcomes. So I can see us at ClearBank actually starting to look at AI or deep machine learning, whatever we want to call it. It's machine learning at the end of the day. Start looking at that and say, actually, this is how we can deliver certain services. Give us this particular data set, we'll help you. Give us this particular data set that we've gained from open banking, and we'll work out actually a debt repayment plan to actually service that off. Now, that might not be us who's done that, but it'll actually be a blending of open banking, a strategic partner, and actually what happens in banking as a service. So we can see machine learning and AI right across banking as a service. And the reason why I said we're all in, because we're starting to look at all those different things there. Customer servicing is a massive one. Sanction screening. Okay? We operate sanction screening as a service at ClearBank. What happens when you hit an entity that says, actually, on these risk set, that's a sanctions individual. Smith is trying to pay bin Laden or somebody like that, right? What happens there? You need to go and check it. So we could use AI that actually goes and learns from humans to then make a better predictability of whether that really was a sanctioned hit. And we'll start using that and then pushing that through as banking as a service.
Me again. Would it be possible to briefly comment on humans as a service in relation to AI, please?
Humans as a service. Oh, I think I might be out of my depth. So it's really interesting. I hope I understand this question the right way, right? So when I look at predictable machines, that's how I think of AI. The feedback loop is the most important element. Okay? So it's actually the predictability is happening with AI, but you're almost having that oversight by humans. And at some point, that's actually flipped around the other way. So machine learning is learning from humans because it's actually learning. And then it flips over, and actually the machine is doing the work, and your humans are verifying. That's how I see actually like humans as a service within AI, if that's your question, right? I kind of understand, okay. But that's where I see it. It's very much about learn from humans, be better than them, predict it, but always had that oversight and control by an actual human. At the end of the day, the biggest challenge for a bank, though, is understanding why did your AI make that particular decision. You have to know why it did that. You can't just go, AI said so. So it is, right? You can trace your neural net and understand actually how did it get to that decision making. I don't need to actually know it full off the top of the bat, but as long as I can understand the model that the neural net has actually applied to that particular process, then I can be accountable for it, and I can understand that decision making process. As soon as I can't understand it, then I'm in trouble.
So can we give Andrew another round of applause for great talk?
Good.
And just a thank you to Andy and Rich from ElastiCloud and Joe from Hancock and Parsons for helping set up UK Azure and running everything. We have another meetup here on the 15th of April. It's building a citizen IoT network in Azure, so 15th of April back here, right? Oh, yeah, and Smithy will sign autographs next time as well. So
Actually, just before we go, we are hiring, right? If you're an unbelievably talented engineer, we are looking for new engineers to come on board. Luca, I'm looking at you. You used to work with us. You've got to come back. Right? So we are hiring at the moment for principal engineers, for software engineers, ideally perm, but we might take the odd contractor. We'll see. Sorry, a little plug there. That was a bit naughty.
thank you, everyone, for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Cheers, everybody. Are you up? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, good stuff.
You all right?